long time. What about smaller advertisers, marketers that are perhaps entering the advertising phase of their brand career? How do you work with the smaller brand coming into the NRL franchise? I would assume very similarly to the way you work with a big brand, but I'm sure that there are issues that they have to work with that involve much greater measurability and return on investment than a brand that has a lot more money to.
Again, it comes down to sitting down with someone on the way in to find out why they want to be there, what we can achieve together and what we can't. If we can't achieve something for a sponsor, then we're better off letting them know that at the outset. In terms of smaller companies, the NRL itself deals across a whole of game sponsorship more than individual sponsorships, and anywhere we can meet an objective with a company, we certainly will and do. But down into the club level is where, depending the size of company you're talking about, there is a much greater range down into certainly smaller opportunities around, ranging from sponsoring individual players at matches to individual games. And around clubs, there's an enormous amount of opportunity to integrate smaller companies into the game right up. And the clubs manage that, we don't. At NRL level, there are obviously some opportunities, but we don't have an enormous array because we're operating across a whole of game sponsorship rather than individual product sponsorship at a micro level, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. Through the game, there's an enormous amount of opportunity, and what we'll often do with companies is if we can't give them what they want to achieve, or we don't think we can, then we can work with them to find clubs that can do that. And that's where another whole array opens up.
Just to finish off, John, where do you see the growth then coming for the NRL? Is it going to be through, as you said earlier, it's going to be through all age groups, or do you really think it's going to be children and parents that are going to drive growth? New generations? Is it going to be people coming from immigrants?
Look, I think the truth of it is that you're always going to be chasing the next area, so that gives you an obvious focus on people that are coming up to being the next decision makers in terms of their own buying power. So that means you're obviously always going to keep an eye on where the young market is and as it grows into adulthood. But in terms of the growth for the game generally, the one thing about rugby league that is unique in our key market, and you would say the AFL has within its strongest markets, which are its home markets, is its universality. And that is that rugby league is a sport that encompasses people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, and all socio-demographics. It's quite unique in New South Wales and Queensland how it brings people together in particular. So in terms of where your big growth is, the sport would look to continue to grow within its current demographic range, which is vast.
Which is the east coast of Australia, New Zealand?
Certainly in terms of regions, you're talking about New South Wales, Queensland, New Zealand, and also grow Melbourne. Melbourne is still an area that people forget attracts 600,000 people. Watched Melbourne in the grand final, 400,000 people thereabouts will watch a major rugby league event when it gets that prime time showing in Melbourne, and hopefully the rugby league grand final will be among there this year. So one of the things people forget is that New South Wales and Queensland host more than half of Australia's population. Everyone talks about 5 capital city viewing figures when they're talking about ratings. They tend to forget that regional New South Wales and Queensland has an enormous population pool that doesn't show up in a lot of those. Half of Australia's population lives in New South Wales and Queensland. And more companies are realising that if you want to get to half of Australia's population, then the best way, more than half of Australia's population, the best way to do it is actually through rugby league, because it's the most universal within those markets, and it's certainly showing that. It's also where more than half of the retail is done in Australia, according to the latest ABS figures I saw anyway. So what we're talking about is, when you say grow within that region, that's not a small region. If we can own that region, then we'll be more than happy. If we can grow beyond the region, we'll also seek to do that as well. But certainly New South Wales and Queensland are core markets and very strong ones, and New Zealand's a very strong market for us. And as I say, Melbourne has a lot of growth in it.
Sounds like there's a lot of growth ahead and a lot of opportunities ahead for the NRL, and some really interesting uses of online in increasing numbers in the stadiums and also viewership numbers.
Thank you. I hope so. It'll be a great future. I think this game's going very well.
I think so too. Thank you very much to John Brady, who's the Director of Media and Communications at the NRL. We've certainly had a very interesting discussion here this morning, and there's definitely some growth ahead for the NRL. Thank you for joining us here this morning, and we look forward to seeing you next week.